My girlfriend's dad loved explaining how successful men provide, so I let him demonstrate with his credit cards. My girlfriend's dad, Frank, owned a car dealership and wore his success like cologne, heavy and suffocating. He was the type of dad who thought his daughter was dating down no matter who she brought home, and I was his favorite target. I worked construction, showed up early, and built things that mattered. But to Frank, I was just a guy in work boots who wasn't good enough for his Claire. For 3 years, Frank made sure I knew my place in his hierarchy. The first family BBQ set the tone when he loudly asked if I needed gas money in front of his country club buddies before slipping me a 20 like I was homeless. During a family dinner, Frank made me sit at the kids' table, explaining to everyone that I'd be more comfortable discussing simpler topics, while the adults talked about investments and business. He also purposely scheduled family events during my work hours, explaining that construction guys were replaceable, but family time wasn't. The worst came on Claire's birthday when he gifted her a BMW and announced that since her boyfriend could only afford a rusty pickup, Daddy would ensure she traveled in style. The breaking point arrived disguised as a celebration at Red Lobster. Frank had invited us to celebrate Claire's promotion. Claire hoped her father was finally coming around, and honestly, so did I. We arrived in our nicest clothes, ready for what we thought would be a fresh start, but Frank had other plans. The moment we sat down, Frank took control of ordering like a seafood dictator, announcing lobster for himself and his wife, shrimp scampi for Claire, then pausing dramatically when he got to me. He told the waiter to give me fish and chips because that's what he's used to. When I tried to change my order, he waved me off and launched into a lecture about how a real man always needs to pick up the bill, how Claire was used to a certain lifestyle that required a provider who understood fine dining, not someone who thought Red Lobster was fancy. When Claire protested, Frank looked right at me and delivered the final blow. Don't worry, when you two break up, and let's be honest, these things rarely last, at least you'll have learned how to provide for a family. That was it, I snapped. All those lectures about real men paying the bill, about never letting your woman see you sweat over a check, suddenly gave me the clearest idea I'd ever had. When our waiter returned to check on us, I smiled and asked to see the menu again, explaining that since Frank was teaching me how real men provide, I wanted to learn properly. Frank couldn't refuse without contradicting his entire speech, so he nodded with smug approval while I began my education. I started by upgrading to the lobster, then added appetizer towers and premium sides, explaining I was learning not to be cheap. Frank's smile began to falter as I moved on to ordering multiple expensive wines, reminding him that he'd said real men know wine, so we should try them all for educational purposes. His face shifted from red to pale to white as the orders piled up, and he tried to suggest we'd ordered enough education for one night, but I was already standing up to make an announcement loud enough for neighboring tables to hear. I explained that Frank was showing me how successful men give back to their community, so I'd ordered 40 meals to go for the homeless shelter downtown because a real provider feeds his community too. The restaurant erupted in applause. Frank sat frozen, trapped by his own words, unable to refuse without revealing himself as a hypocrite after his entire speech about real men providing. The bill arrived like a death sentence, $1,900 and change. His hands shook as he reached for his wallet, and his first credit card was declined, forcing him to split the payment across 2 cards while the entire restaurant watched him sweat through his polo shirt. The ride home was silent, except for Claire's mom gushing about the shelter donation and asking Frank why he'd kept his charitable side hidden for so long. Frank didn't make a single joke about money after that night, and Claire later told me he'd admitted to her mother that I had more balls than he'd given me credit for.